back from Liverpool, from the IATEFL conference. And now we have John Gray, who gave a very interesting plenary session this morning. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, why don't you tell us a little bit about your plenary session? Why don't you tell the audience a kind of
Okay, well, my plenary today was about gender and sexuality in English language teaching. And I was making a kind of, or setting up a kind of comparison between inclusive education and queer pedagogy, and trying to explore a little bit maybe some of the tensions between those two things. So I sort of set the scene a little bit by talking about the background to the whole thing, in terms of legislative reform, for example, which there's been a lot of across the world. So I would see things as generally improving globally. However, although there's a lot of legislation in place, a lot of this legislation doesn't seem to filter down into people's lives.
Very real.
And exactly, yeah. And I suppose one of the things that I was trying to make the case for was that in the classroom we also need to engage with these things. Okay. And then I went on to look at, for example, the way curriculum and materials very often don't really pick up on issues of gender and sexuality in ways that might be seen as being progressive, I suppose, particularly with regard to non-normative sexualities. There's a kind of erasure, if you like, of LGBT people, and people have been talking about that since the 1990s, going way back to Cynthia Nelson. Other people like Scott Thornbury have talked about it. But although people have talked about it, we haven't really made much impact, I don't think, on the industry itself. And I think one of the things I was trying to do was to say, look, maybe it's time that the industry did begin to take on board some of these things with regard to representational practices, etc.
Yeah. And why do you think that the industry has not been moving forward that much, even though we've been speaking about?
Well, I think it's not, well, first of all, I think education has not been very good in general at taking on board these things, partly because people are afraid, I think, things like that. And we live in a very heteronormative world, and very often people don't see the need to do these things. I think there's often an impression that because there is legislation, for example, across much of the global north, that this will filter down eventually. Yeah. However, I don't think that's the case. I think we need to be a bit more proactive. That's education generally, and I think studies show that education globally has not been very good on this particular issue. With regard to the industry, I think the industry is concerned with profit. Yeah. And I think there is a concern that if there was to be more inclusive representation, that perhaps products would not be bought.
Okay. Actually, I think some authors sometimes mention there are certain topics that they could never talk about in course books or things like that. So
and of course, anyone who's ever taught knows that students are very happy to talk about a lot of these things that we're not supposed to talk about at all. Yeah. I mean, I was a classroom teacher for many years. I was a classroom teacher from 1984 until 1998, working mainly in Spain. But I mean, many of the things that we talked about in class were things that were not included in textbooks.
Yeah. I'm also involved in inclusive education a lot. I've been working a lot on that. And I totally agree with you. I think there are certain topics and aspects that are not prohibited, but nobody mentions. Yes. Everybody says it's okay, but nobody wants to do. But I think also the education system was built upon for the first industrial revolution, everybody was the same. All they tried to standardize people as well. But we are in the fourth industrial revolution, the 21st century. I think it's time.
So I think times have moved on, but I think the industry is perhaps lagging behind a little bit in that respect.
What can we do, we as English teachers, or
well, I think one of the informants that I quoted from in my plenary, Mark, said that we have to be braver, and in that quotation he said, I have to be braver. So I think individual teachers have to be braver, but I think he was also saying that all of us have to be braver. People who are involved in textbook publishing, teacher educators, etc. I think there's a need for all of us to think about how we can move this thing forward. I went to a very interesting talk after the plenary where someone was saying that we can't rely on publishers to do this work for us. Perhaps teachers have got to think about making their own materials and bringing those into the classroom. So I think perhaps teachers maybe coming together, working together, can do very interesting work. And there's very interesting stuff that's out there already. Like, for example, I referred to in my talk the work by Francesca Stella and Jennifer McDougall. And what they've produced, and with their colleagues, what they've produced is an amazing resource based on a project about LGBT migration to Scotland. But the resource that they've created for ESOL is very usable. It's very good material. It deals with a lot of difficult issues around LGBT inclusivity, such as homophobia, transphobia, racism, etc. The material is very easily adaptable for teachers who are working in different settings. So I think projects like that are perhaps not mainstream publishing could inspire teachers to do their own thing that would be appropriate for their particular context.
Yeah, and also sharing what they are doing.
Exactly.
Because actually I think we all can learn from what other people are doing.
Yeah.
And the more you share, the more it becomes popular.
Exactly.
And then the industry will see that, okay.
Yeah, the industry will probably lag behind.
So we'll see if they want to be, they want to continue, maybe they have to.
Yeah.
Okay, and have you been into other talks or?
I've just been to one other talk because I've been very busy talking to people.
I imagine.
But I went to a very interesting talk on materials by a guy called Tyson, talking about how materials could be made much more inclusive. And it was very interesting.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for being here.
Okay, thank you very much for talking to me.
Well, we continue in some moments. Okay.